Sacsayhuaman is famous for these incredible stone walls where the stones perfectly fit together. Some of them are bigger than a car and weigh over 100 tons. What's even more amazing is that the Incas built this without machines or modern tools or technology.
It's surprising how some things just exist without any logical explanations. One of such things is the dexterity built into the Inca fortress and the giant Inca stones.
The stones fit so tightly together that not even a piece of paper can fit between them. It's estimated that around 20,000 to 30,000 people worked on building this fortress. It took them between 50 to 70 years to build what they completed.
High in the mountains of Peru, overlooking the valley like a throne carved from rock, there's a place that feels almost alive. The stones don't just sit there. They fit together with such an unsettling precision. These blocks weigh hundreds of tons, yet they're joined so tightly you can't even slip a knife blade between them. So, what gives them this thickness and ability to defy science? Join us in this video as we explore the mystery of the Sacsayhuaman Inca fortress. The mystery Sacsayhuaman. This place is called Sacsayhuaman, and what strikes you first isn't how big it is, it's how it makes you feel. It feels impossible, like something that shouldn't exist, at least not with the technology people had at the time. Its name, from the Quechua language, is often translated as satisfied falcon, a mythical bird said to protect the first Inca ruler. But another interpretation changes everything. Some believe it represents the head of a puma, because if you could look down at the ancient Inca capital of Cusco from the sky, you'd see something incredible. The entire city was designed in the shape of a sacred puma, and Sacsayhuaman, that would be the head. Its massive zigzagging walls form the teeth, frozen mid-bite. Once you realize that, the question is no longer what is this? It becomes why was it built this way? Sitting 3,700 meters above sea level, this is no ordinary fortress. The first wall alone stretches about 400 meters and rises up to 18 meters high. Some of the stones are enormous, up to 9 meters tall, 5 meters wide, and 4 meters thick. And then there's the weight, the part that really challenges your understanding. These blocks can weigh anywhere from 128 to 200 tons. Historical records say construction began in 1431 under Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui and was completed in 1508 during the reign of Huayna Capac. It took around 77 years, more than 20,000 workers, and roughly 200,000 stone blocks. Altogether, the structure amounts to over 6,000 cubic meters of stone, and somehow it all fits together perfectly. With that much stone, you could build several modern buildings. But this wasn't just a building, it was an idea. Because what truly amazes people isn't the size, it's the precision. Spanish chroniclers wrote about joints so tight that not even the tip of a pin could fit between the stones. And even today, engineers study those connections and come to a surprising conclusion. The level of accuracy rivals, sometimes even surpasses, modern construction. There are no straight, uniform lines like the bricks we use today. No repeated patterns. Every single stone is unique, carefully shaped to fit its neighbors like pieces of a complex 3D puzzle. This technique even has a name: polygonal masonry. Instead of simple rectangles, the stones have irregular, organic shapes, with multiple faces and angles, some with 12 sides or more. And this wasn't done for beauty alone. It was done for survival. Peru sits in one of the most earthquake-prone regions in the world. Over the centuries, powerful earthquakes have destroyed colonial buildings and even modern structures. But Sacsayhuaman has remained standing, almost untouched. Why? Because its walls don't resist the movement of the earth. They move with it. The walls lean slightly inward, which makes them more stable. The doors and windows are trapezoidal, wider at the bottom and narrower at the top, helping to distribute stress more effectively during earthquakes. This wasn't accidental. It was intelligent design. So, who designed this Sacsayhuaman? How did they come about such knowledge and manpower? Keep watching to find out. Who designed the Sacsayhuaman? According to legend, the construction was led by 4 master builders: Jualchi, Inca Maricanchi, Ahuana Inca, and Kaya Kunchui. Over nearly a century, under 3 rulers, Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui, Tupac Inca Yupanqui, and Huayna Capac, they transformed what had once been a settlement of the Quilque culture around the year 900 into one of the most extraordinary structures ever built. But here's the part many people don't expect. Sacsayhuaman may not have been built primarily as a military fortress. Yes, it could hold around 1,000 warriors. Yes, weapons were stored there. And yes, it overlooks Cusco from a powerful strategic position. But the Inca world wasn't constantly under threat of invasion like Europe. So the question remains, if it wasn't just for war, what was it really for? A different account of the story says Sacsayhuaman wasn't just built for defense. It may have been a ceremonial center, a place deeply tied to spirituality. Some believe it functioned as a house of the sun, with temples dedicated to Inti, the Inca sun god. At the same time, it likely served as a massive imperial storehouse, holding weapons, food, textiles, ceramics, tools, and even precious metals. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Chiesa de Leon wrote in 1553 that the Inca required entire provinces to send 20,000 workers along with supplies for the project. Another chronicler, Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, described halls filled with military equipment. So this place wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. It was a ritual. It was power, carved into stone. And that power was built into its design. The structure is made up of 3 massive terraced platforms, each stretching about 360 meters, arranged in a striking zigzag pattern. At first glance, it might look like a defensive feature, but it also carries a deeper meaning. These weren't just walls. They were the teeth of the sacred puma. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1536, the Inca rebellion erupted. Manco Inca Yupanqui led a massive force, estimated between 100,000 and 200,000 warriors, and laid siege to Cusco, which had fallen under Spanish control. On May 5th, Inca forces captured Sacsayhuaman, which had been abandoned by the Spanish, and turned it into a powerful base for attacking the city below. From that elevated position, they launched sling stones wrapped in burning cotton, sending fire raining down from the teeth of the puma. For months, the siege dragged on, turning into a nightmare. Spanish accounts describe the fear of being surrounded and cut off. But the Spanish had something the Incas had never truly faced on this scale: cavalry. Hernando Pizarro led a desperate counterattack. His brother, Juan Pizarro, commanded a direct assault on the massive stone walls until a stone struck him in the head. He died days later, and in the chaos of that battle, one name rises into legend: Cahuid, a noble warrior who defended the fortress with relentless determination. When the Spanish finally broke through after 3 days of brutal fighting, Sacsayhuaman made a final choice. Rather than surrender, he covered his head with his cloak and threw himself from the highest tower. It wasn't just an act of defiance, it was a message. His death became a symbol of resistance, so powerful that even Hernando Pizarro is said to have admired his courage. After the war, what happened to the Sacsayhuaman? How did it become this legend that we now admire? Keep watching to find out. The Inca fortress was home to even more mystery. The defeat at Sacsayhuaman marked a turning point. After that, any real chance of resistance began to fade. If the fortress had remained in indigenous hands, Cusco might have fallen, and the entire story of the conquest could have been different. But it didn't. By March 1537, the rebellion was over. What came next feels almost cinematic. The battlefield was left covered in bodies, and above it, flocks of condors circled and descended to feed. The image was so powerful, so unforgettable, that those birds later appeared on Cusco's colonial coat of arms, a lasting symbol of Spanish victory. And this is where the story shifts, from history into mystery. Because Sacsayhuaman is far from fully understood. In 2008, archaeologists uncovered additional ruins around the site. Not long after, an international team, 39 specialists from Peru and Poland, including archaeologists, historians, anthropologists, and architects, launched a 3-year excavation project using advanced 3D technology. By 2024, the discoveries were striking. Fragments of Inca mesas, traces of pigments, white, red, blue, and yellow, on floors and walls. And something far more unsettling, thousands of teeth, monkey teeth, jaguar teeth, but most of all, human teeth. Many of them were carefully perforated, as if they had been worn, threaded into necklaces, or sewn into ceremonial garments. It points to a level of ritual and symbolism far deeper than most people imagine when they first see those massive stone walls. And yet, even with all these discoveries, the biggest mystery hasn't changed: the stones. Some suggest lost technologies. Others imagine substances that could soften stone, or lifting methods that leave no trace behind. And then there's the most grounded explanation, and perhaps the most impressive of all: generations of accumulated knowledge. Skilled builders who understood stone the way we understand language. Craftsmen who mastered weight, balance, and fit as if it were a kind of sacred science. Of course, there are more extreme ideas too, like alien intervention. But those theories often say more about us than about the past. Sometimes, it's easier to believe something wasn't human than to accept just how capable humans have always been. Here's the interesting part about all these. After the siege of Cusco, Sacsayhuaman entered a very different chapter, one of slow destruction. The Spanish didn't just occupy the city, they began to dismantle it. Stone by stone, they took apart much of Sacsayhuaman, using its perfectly cut blocks to build Colonial Cusco. Churches, government buildings, and the homes of wealthy Spaniards all rose from the remains of the fortress. Inca Garcilaso de la Vega captured it bluntly. He wrote that, to avoid the effort and cost of quarrying new stone, the Spaniards simply tore down the finely crafted walls. In his words, there was hardly a house in the city that wasn't built, at least in part, from those original stones. What had once been a symbol of Inca power was gradually repurposed into the foundation of a new colonial world. And yet, not everything could be taken. The stones that remain today are the ones that proved too massive to move. The largest blocks, some weighing hundreds of tons, were simply left behind, too difficult even for the Spanish to dismantle. Over time, the site changed again. In the modern era, as Sacsayhuaman became a major tourist destination, additional retaining walls were added in certain areas to prevent erosion. These newer sections are easy to spot. They're rougher, less precise, and noticeably different from the original Inca craftsmanship. In fact, early photographs from the 1900s show parts of the site without these additions, and some of the newer stones even have modern dates carved into them. But the story didn't end there. On March 13, 2008, archaeologists uncovered more ruins along the edges of the site, suggesting that Sacsayhuaman may have been built over an earlier settlement from the Quilca culture, which existed before the rise of the Inca. The structures appear ceremonial, though their exact purpose is still unknown. Then, in January 2010, nature reminded everyone just how vulnerable even ancient wonders can be. Heavy rainfall in the region caused damage to parts of the site, highlighting the ongoing challenge of preserving it. But what about the Inca people? Are there elements in their civilization that explain how the stones came to be? Let's see. Explaining the Inca mystery stones. One modern attempt to explain the mystery comes from Vince Lee, an author, architect, and explorer who has studied ancient sites known for moving massive stones. His theory is surprisingly practical. He suggests that the stones were carved before being placed, shaped with incredible precision, so they would fit perfectly into prepared spaces within the walls. Once ready, the blocks could have been dragged up ramps, positioned above the wall, and set on top of stacked logs. Then, slowly and carefully, the logs would be removed one by one, lowering the stone into its exact position. It sounds simple, but executing it would have required extraordinary skill. Lee and his team tested this idea on a smaller scale. They managed some success, though nothing close to the perfection seen at Sacsayhuaman. Still, they believed that with enough time and practice, the Incas could have achieved far greater precision, even with much larger stones. And if a stone didn't fit the first time perfectly, the theory suggests the Incas may have been able to lift it back up, adjust it, and try again. But moving the stones was a challenge of its own. Experiments carried out near Ollantaytambo tried to recreate how these massive blocks might have been transported. The results were mixed. In one test, researchers attempted to lower a 1-ton stone down a mountain. They quickly lost control, and the stone rolled freely downhill, dangerous and unpredictable. It's unlikely the Incas relied on such a risky method, since it could easily have led to accidents. In another experiment, they tried towing a stone weighing close to 10 tons across cobblestones. About 12 people pushed from behind, while over 100 pulled with ropes. This time they succeeded, moving the stone at a surprisingly steady pace. It offered a glimpse into what might have been possible. After all, the Inca weren't working in isolation. They had built a network of roads nearly 25,000 kilometers long, some of them paved with stone. These routes may have played a key role in transporting materials across difficult terrain. Even so, modern experiments haven't fully matched what early observers described. The same Pedro Chiesa de Leon, who documented Inca construction in the 1500s, claimed to have seen massive stones being moved with a level of efficiency that still hasn't been replicated. In fact, some of the largest stones at Sacsayhuaman today are more than twice the size of what he recorded in his time. So the mystery remains not completely solved, just better understood. And yet, Sacsayhuaman is not just a relic of the past. It's still alive in the present. Every year, people gather near the site to celebrate Inti Raymi, the Inca festival of the winter solstice and New Year, held on June 24th. Another important event, Huarachicuy, takes place there each September, continuing ancient traditions of initiation and ceremony. And on ordinary days, the massive stone terraces serve a quieter purpose. Locals from Cusco use the open fields within the walls for jogging, tai chi, and other activities, moving through a space where history, mystery, and daily life all meet. So, how did the Inca people come to be? Is it really true that they knew enough to build such stones? Keep watching to find out. The Inca Genesis. In the beginning, the Incas didn't call their empire the Inca Empire. They called it Tawantinsuyu, a word from Quechua that means the union of four parts. It wasn't just a name, it was a description. In Quechua, Tawa means four, and Entin refers to a group. So Tawantinsuyu literally describes a unified set of four regions, four lands brought together into one system. When the Spanish arrived, they struggled with the pronunciation and wrote it as Tahuatinsuyo. Over time, they replaced the original name entirely, calling the region Peru, a name that stuck. Even the word Inca doesn't mean exactly what many people think. Today, it's often translated as king or ruler, referring to the emperor, the Sapa Inca. But originally, the term had a broader meaning. It could refer not only to the ruler, but also to the noble class. And that class was surprisingly small. Out of a population of around 10 million people, only about 15,000 to 40,000 were considered Inca nobility. Yet, they governed the entire empire. What made that possible wasn't just power, it was organization. The Inca system was built on central planning, not a traditional market economy. There were no large-scale marketplaces like those in Europe. Instead, most people lived in a structured, community-based system. Families didn't pay taxes with money. They paid with labor. This system, known as the mita, required households to contribute work, building roads, farming state lands, serving or supporting large projects like terraces and irrigation systems. In return, the state took care of its people. It provided food during times of famine. It built agricultural infrastructure to improve harvests. And it even hosted large feasts for communities, moments of shared celebration that reinforced loyalty and unity. Trade did exist, especially along the northern coast, where some groups used early forms of commodity money. Barter also played a role in certain regions. But overall, the Inca world ran on something different. Not currency, but cooperation. Not markets, but obligation and reciprocity. It was an empire held together not just by force, but by a system that made every part depend on the whole. While the state relied on the mita system to organize labor, everyday life in the empire was built on something even older. Long before the rise of the Inca, villages already practiced a form of communal work known as Minca, a system where people came together to complete shared tasks for the good of the community. That tradition didn't disappear. In fact, it still exists today in parts of the Andes, often called faena. But the Inca economy wasn't just about labor, it was about balance. At its core was a system often described as a vertical archipelago. Instead of relying on one type of land, communities accessed different ecological zones: coast, highlands, and jungle, each providing unique resources. This created a network of interdependence across regions. Holding it all together was another key idea. Aini, a deep cultural principle of reciprocity. You helped others, knowing that help would return when you needed it. It wasn't just economic, it was social, even moral. How were the Inca people able to live and lead happy lives? What other systems did they have in place for growth? Let's see how the Inca people navigated it all. Agriculture sat at the center of everything for the Inca people. The Inca developed a highly sophisticated farming system based on generations of knowledge. They built terraces, known as andenes, to farm steep mountain slopes. They created sunken fields, raised fields, and even artificial lakes to control water and improve yields. They also refined their tools, using implements like the chaquitacla, a foot-powered plow, and the raucana, designed for working tough soil. Their most important crop? The potato. There were over 200 species and thousands of varieties, making it the foundation of their diet. Alongside it, crops like corn and coca held special, even sacred, significance. But what's even more impressive is how they experimented. The Inca built agricultural research centers, places like Moray, where circular terraces created different microclimates. These allowed them to test and grow crops from across the empire in one location. Livestock was just as important. In the Andes, camelids were essential to daily life. Domesticated animals like llamas and alpacas were raised in large numbers. They provided wool, transport, and meat, forming a key part of the production system. Wild species also played a role. Vicuñas were carefully hunted in coordinated group efforts called chacos. After being captured, they were shorn for their fine wool and then released to preserve their population. Guanacos, on the other hand, were hunted mainly for their meat, which was highly valued. But meat wasn't an everyday food. Because of restrictions on slaughter, it was likely reserved for special occasions, ceremonies, feasts, or for feeding soldiers. For most people, fresh meat would have been a rare luxury. Then, everything changed. With the arrival of the Spanish, new animals were introduced: cattle, sheep, and horses. These animals consumed large amounts of pasture, gradually degrading the land and reshaping the environment of the Andes. It marked the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through the entire system that the Inca had carefully built. At the very top of Inca society stood the Sapa Inca, the supreme ruler, based in Cusco. But he wasn't seen as just a king. He was believed to be divine. The Sapa Inca was considered the earthly representative and direct descendant of Inti, the sun god. This gave his authority a sacred foundation. He wasn't just governing an empire, he was fulfilling a divine mission. His people even referred to themselves as children of the sun, reinforcing the idea that both ruler and subjects were part of a sacred order. Right below him stood the Wilak Umu, the high priest, who oversaw religious life and ranked second in power. While the Inca promoted their own state religion, they didn't completely erase local beliefs. Important sacred sites, like the oracle at Pachacamac on the coast, continued to be honored and integrated into the wider system. After the reign of Pachacuti, the idea of divine lineage became even more important. The royal family placed a strong emphasis on maintaining pure bloodlines. In some cases, this meant marriages between siblings, especially between the Sapa Inca and his primary wife. That wife, known as the Koya, was far more than a queen in the usual sense. She was his equal in ceremonial and religious matters, a powerful figure in her own right. Just as the Sapa Inca was associated with the sun, she was often linked to the moon and female deities. Together, they represented a kind of cosmic balance at the center of power. Religion wasn't separate from politics. It was politics. The Sapa Inca personally led major ceremonies, the most important being Inti Raymi, the Festival of the Sun. Held during the June solstice, it brought together nobles, priests, soldiers, and the people of Cusco. Even the mummified remains of past rulers were present. What else held the Inca people together? At the heart of the Inca people, what kept the unity? Keep watching to find out. From the Eye of Inca. The celebration lasts several days and ends with a symbolic act. The Sapa Inca breaking the demigod with a foot plow, marking renewal, fertility, and the continuation of life. And at the center of all this was Cusco itself. The city wasn't just a capital, it was seen as the center of the universe. Sacred sites, known as huacas, were connected by invisible lines called tseques, radiating outward from the city in all directions. To the Inca, this wasn't just geography, it was cosmology. The chronicler Inca Garcilaso de la Vega described Cusco as the navel of the universe. Even the structure of leadership may have reflected this idea of balance. Most historians believe the empire was ruled by a single line of emperors, divided into two dynasties, Huron and Hanan. But some scholars suggest a different possibility, that power may have been shared between two complementary rulers, following an Andean tradition of dual leadership. By the time the Spanish arrived, however, it was the Hanan dynasty that held clear authority. This system wasn't just about control, it was about meaning. Every role, every ritual, every relationship was part of a larger design, one where power, religion, and the cosmos were all deeply connected. The Inca Empire wasn't run like a tightly controlled, centralized state in the modern sense. Instead, it functioned as a decentralized system, with strong leadership at the top, but power distributed across regions. At the center of it all was the Sapa Inca, ruling from Cusco. From there, the empire was divided into four massive regions, known as Suyu, Chinchay-Suyu, northwest, Antisuyu, northeast, Kuntisuyu, southwest, and Kulasuyu, southeast. These four regions met at Cusco, forming the structure of the empire known as Tawantinsuyu, the union of four parts. This system likely took shape around 1460, during the reign of Pachacuti, even before the empire reached its full size. At first, the four regions were roughly equal. But as the empire expanded, especially along the Andes, their sizes shifted and adapted. Cusco itself held a unique position. It wasn't just another province, or Wamani. Instead, It functioned more like a modern federal district, similar to Washington, D.C. or Mexico City. It stood apart as the political and spiritual heart of the empire. While the Sacsayhuaman Inca and his royal family governed from Cusco, each of the 4 Suyu was overseen by a high-ranking official known as an Apu, a title of great respect, also associated with sacred mountains. The system didn't stop there. Both Cusco and the 4 regions were further divided into 2 symbolic halves, Hanan, upper, and Hurin, lower. This dual structure reflected a deeper Andean worldview, one built on balance and complementary opposites. Below the Suyu level were smaller administrative units called Wamani, similar to provinces. Because the Inca didn't use a written language in the way we do today, we don't have a complete record of all these regions. But from colonial accounts, historians estimate there were more than 86 Wamani across the empire, over 48 in the highlands, and at least 38 along the coast. What emerges is a system that wasn't just about control. It was about structure, balance, and adaptability. An empire spread across mountains, forests, and deserts, held together not by paper or ink, but by organization, hierarchy, and a shared understanding of how the world was meant to work. Not all regions of the Inca Empire were equal. Each Suyu had its own scale, geography, and importance. The most populated region was Chinchay Suyu. It included the lands of the former Chimu Empire and stretched across much of the northern Andes. At its height, it extended into what we now know as Ecuador and even parts of Colombia. This made it not only densely populated, but also one of the most economically and culturally significant regions of the empire. In contrast, the largest region by land area was Kula Suyu. Named after the Aymara-speaking Kula people, it covered a vast territory spanning the Bolivian Altiplano and much of the southern Andes. Its reach extended deep into present-day Argentina and as far south as central Chile, near the Maipo or Maule River. Historian José Bengoa even identified Quillota as one of the most important Inca settlements in Chile. Then there was Antisuyu. It was the second smallest region and lay to the northeast of Cusco, stretching into the high Andes and toward the Amazon. Interestingly, its name is believed to be the origin of the word Andes. Somehow, the Inca people managed to blend these differences and survived until today. The Inca took knowledge and perfected it. Their process was as meticulous as it was effective. Instead of forcing stones to fit, they shaped them gradually, placing one rock on top of another, then carving away tiny sections where pressure marks appeared. Over time, each stone was adjusted again and again until it fit perfectly into place. What do you think about the masterpiece of the Inca fortress and the giant stones that have no logical explanation? Do you think humans are somehow responsible? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining us as we brought you the incredible architectural mastery achieved by the Inca people. We hope you found this video both enlightening and interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more interesting facts. See you there.